welcome to everyone who's very punctual. I think we'll wait another couple of minutes before we get started, but thank you all for being here. All right, I think we're at quorum. Everybody, welcome to our final panel of the day. To everyone who's been with us throughout the day, thank you. I know it's been a long day. We've had some of the leading early childhood education experts from the policy world, from practitioners to researchers, to actually the people sort of most involved in early childhood care and education. We've had parents, Anganwadi workers, helpers, supervisors come in and share, their big ideas, what they're thinking. And we're so excited to sort of take it further now and bring in the global perspective on early childhood care and education. We have 3 experts with us here who will really sort of help us look through the global models on early childhood care and education, inspire us all to sort of what we can do more in India as well. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the moderator for this panel, Margo Drakos. Margo is a managing director in the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, where she serves on the senior leadership team. Before DRK, she was a serial entrepreneur, including of Artia, which was addressing inequities in arts education. She's also founded several tech nonprofits along the way, and is a very accomplished musician. So Margo has had several careers and has been working with Rocket Learning now for 1.5 years or so. And it's just such a pleasure to have you here. Margo, Temina, Dr. Anand, Janhvi, such a pleasure to host you and to sort of learn from your wisdom.
Well, thank you so much, Namya. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you all. As Namya shared, I'm Margo. I'm joining you from North Carolina today, and I'm just so honored to be part of this rocket learning community as a board member and to be with you virtually for this important convening, the first of many, we hope. I'm humbled to be with this group of extraordinary experts and to be entrusted as a moderator. As I shared, I myself am not an expert in this space, and I'm so excited to learn from you during this session. I'll take a moment to introduce each of you, and then we can dive in. Janhvi Maheshwari Kanoria is the Director of Innovation at Education Above All, EAA, which is a Qatar-based foundation working to ensure quality educational access for our world's most marginalized children. EAA currently supports and works with over 10 million children in more than 50 geographies globally. And Janhvi has extensive experience stemming from her teaching experiences first in K-12 schools, and then in higher education, working across programming and strategy and impact design, and as well as in the government policy side. So we're very pleased to have you here, Janhvi. And hello, Dr. Sunny Anand is a globally renowned pediatrician and clinical researcher who serves as professor of pediatrics, anesthesiology, perioperative and pain medicine at Stanford University School of Medicine, where he directs the pain stress neurobiology lab, the Jackson Vaughan Critical Care Research Fund, and serves as the editor for the journal Pediatric Research, among many, many other things. He is considered a world authority on pain stress in newborns and pain management in infants, and developed the first ever scientific rationale for pain perception in early life. And we're thrilled to have your perspective here today as this informs our discussion. So thank you for joining us. And last but certainly not least, Temina Madon is a lecturer and researcher at the University of California at Berkeley, at Haas Berkeley as well, and is co-founder of the Agency Fund, which focuses on the design and evaluation of technologies for economic development. She is a member of the South Park Commons and an advisor for the Center for Effective Global Action, where she also served as its founding executive director. Temina has served as a consultant for the World Health Organization, the World Bank, and the Gates Foundation, among others, and is an ongoing advisor and trusted mentor to startups like Rocket Learning and others in the area of technology and global development. So we are just thrilled to have you all here. Just to set the stage, I know it's been a full day for those that have been part of it, and good morning to those joining us in the States. Each of you brings such diverse experiences and perspectives to the work of early childhood care, education, and development. And so that we just have a moment to get to know each of you beyond your, incredible CVs, could you share a bit about what brought you into this work, or rather what inspires your commitment to young children globally in this way? And Janhvi, do you mind if I pick on you to kick us off?
Of course. Thank you, Margo, for the very kind introduction. And first, I just want to congratulate Rocket Learning on this fabulous event and really raising the profile of early childhood education in India. It's really, really lovely. And thank you for having me. I think my journey in education was really prompted by my privilege. As an Indian girl, I have a very supportive family, had an incredibly empowering education. I have multiple champions who were there for me at every stage of the way. And the first time that I actually witnessed that there were people who truly hated their school experience, or that school actually killed their self-confidence, it was really painful for me to see. And perhaps the most debilitating thing was to know that there were people from whom nothing was expected at all in life. And I just could not fathom that or understand that. And it really broke my heart. So it's really my privilege that brought me here, because I just felt like I was fortunate enough to have champions. And if I can do even a little bit of that for someone else, then I should really try. So that's what brings me in education. I feel like it's a really exciting space to be in, because there's so many problems to solve, and all of these problems are so multifaceted. There's so much of just interpersonal relations, there's so much of behavior, there's so much of psychology, but then there's so much of economics and education and pedagogy. So it all comes together so beautifully that it's really a wonderful space to be in.
Oh, beautiful words. Thank you for that. And Dr. Sunny, would you mind sharing how you came to this work as well?
Absolutely. Thank you for that kind introduction, Margo. I'm a pediatrician, and I went into the world of pediatrics because of my love for children from a very early age. And so when I started doing some research at Oxford, I was looking at the hormonal metabolic stress responses of babies who were having surgery. And all along, I wanted to see, how could we capture the response instead of to one event to the entire hospitalization, or even longer to the periods of development that are critical for the human brain and, have lifespan effects. And so I hit upon some biomarkers, and when I started measuring, say, cortisol in hair, because hair grows at 1 centimeter a month, 6 centimeters captures the last 6 months of whatever is happening in the child's social ecology. That's what exposed me to the fact that there are so many children who are facing early life adversity, who are being exposed to adverse childhood experiences, either from mental illness in the household, or drug addiction, or whatever other reasons there may be, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, or incarceration, or things like that. And so that has really opened up a huge vista of research. And that's why, I started out as directing the pain stress neurobiology lab, but now it's called the Child Wellness Lab. We've been through a rebranding in the last 2 years, and have really expanded the scope of the research that we're doing. This is what fascinates me. We now have 3,000 biomarkers which can, pinpoint exactly what is happening in the child's brain development, or in their, organ system function when they're exposed to these adverse conditions, malnutrition, and things like that. So that is the joy and the agony and the ecstasy of my work.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I look forward to having you expand upon some of that in our conversation today. Temina, if I might pass it over to you as well.
Sure. I come from the sort of evidence-based policy movement, and this is the idea that we can do better in our policymaking when we study the issues at hand, learn what the most effective interventions are to societal problems, improve their cost effectiveness over time, and scale the things that work. So I spent many years helping to build academic systems and government partners who are rigorously studying their policies and programs, and usually using randomized experiments, but other methods as well. This very rationalist approach drives you to early childhood development. If you want to have the biggest bang for the buck in economic development, in social and human development, you invest very early in young children. We have seen again and again in randomized trial after randomized trial that when you improve children's health in that 0 to 6 window, it has impacts on their incomes 20 years later. That's from a deworming trial that was done in East Africa many years ago. The children of children who receive investments are healthier. So there are multi-generational effects. And so just from a strictly rational, how do I do the most good with the money I have? Investing in those early years is transformative. And I think that's part of what motivates me to invest in this space.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you for that. Certainly those on the call and are joining us today, and you all know how essential ECCE is in the life and future of our society, our collective environment and world. 85% of the brain development occurs before age of 6, and so forth and so on. And I know, Janhvi, you and I had some beautiful exchanges prior to the session where you put that staggering and disturbing number of about 175 million, or half of all pre-primary children globally, that are not enrolled in any form of ECCE, excuse me. Could you expand about what you're seeing globally? What are the factors that are driving this access gap for early childhood care and education?
Sure. So starting off very sobering with that very sobering fact. So half of all pre-primary children globally are not enrolled, even though the SDG target 4.2, the promised target is between 30 and 50% by 2030, which seems almost close to unlikely. The reality is there's just not enough resources. So if you think about the fact that in 2020, there are 12 million ECD teachers globally. We need 8 million more in just low and middle income countries just to close the access gap. And this is close to impossible. I mean, as an illustration, if you just take one country, let's take South Sudan. In South Sudan, if every single graduating secondary school student became an early childhood teacher, you would still be short of teachers. And of course, that's not something we're working towards in any case. So we recognize the huge gap that there's going to be. There's also just a lot of limited investment in this space because all our efforts as an education community have been focused on the 12 years of compulsory education, which most governments and schooling systems are working towards. So very little resourcing is going to the pre-primary years. And there are lots of excuses made to support and justify that, right? Which include that, schooling should not start so early, education should not be compulsory that young, and so on and so forth. The main three factors that educators have identified as driving the difference between those who are enrolled and versus not is number one, and not surprisingly, poverty. Number two is the mother's education level. And number three is whether the child's place of residence is urban or rural. Of course, those who are in urban settings have much more likelihood to be involved in some sort of programming. But let me give you a little different note on this. The reason I'm here on this conversation is because I work with learners who are usually in school or out of school, but in primary age or secondary age and thereafter. And the reason that there's a problem in that age group is because of the limited early childhood education. So it's a trickle effect. So usually when a child enters a first year of compulsory education, which is very often grade 1, we're already dealing with students who are behind. And you see this in India too, right? I mean, in India, it's so common where you have an entrance test for a school. When you have an entrance test for a school, what does that mean? That means that the child is already meant to have certain skills when they're getting into the school. And to lend a little word to my colleagues here on this panel, that those skills are not limited to education, right? Those are also pro-social skills. Those are also skills in terms of just like behavior, even comfort level separating from a guardian or a parent, all of that. So what happens is it converts for us into a race of catch-up. So what we end up doing is a lot of our programming, unfortunately, has to become simpler and simpler and more basic, working down to that early childhood level in order to really help catch learners at where they are. Very often, the first year of schooling ends up going and just helping children settle down and catching those skills. And then what happens is every year after that, we're just running to try and be at school level. So what I want you to imagine is almost like a broken piping system. What we are doing is just sticking blue tack everywhere that we can to try and catch as much water that's falling through that piping system. But we're not fixing it because, in order to fix it, we really have to focus on the early childhood piece. I mean, again, I'll give you another example of this. The enrollment rate in grade 1 usually exceeds the population in this age group by 30%. What does that mean? That means over 30% of the population is repeating that grade. Why are they repeating grade 1? Why do we have repetition in grade 1? Because the learners are not prepared to be here. And that often is costing us over 1.2 extra years of education per child. So we are putting money into the problem, except we're putting money into the wrong place. We're putting money into fixing the problem or just managing the problem as opposed to fixing the system. And sometimes over 10% of an education budget is wasted just trying to do that.
No, that's thank you. No,
No,
thank you. Thank you. No, thank you. This is thank you for that context and setting that stage. I wonder, you know, Dr. Sunny, you touched on in your very moving opening remarks, and you touched on the childhood wellness lab. And I've been curious to ask you this question. Was talking about this with my family last night at dinner. You know, pain is one of the most fundamental mechanisms of learning, if you will, and you study this at the earliest stages of life. And I was wondering if you could share how do you see, or how can your work inform both the importance of early childhood education and the mechanics of early childhood education, you know, meaning how could we or should we be thinking about this or approaching this?
Yeah. You see, the Janhvi has hit the nail on the head. From a neuroscience perspective, there are several things that come to mind. The newborn brain, the brain of babies from the day of birth until about 6 months, is growing at the rate of 1 milligram a minute. Every minute, it's growing 1 minute. There's no cancer that can, even compete or come close to that. So what happens? Everything is important. Nutrition is very important. You know, responsive caregiving is important. Having a clean and, less noisy or less chaotic environment is important. So these are formative times. My friend Pasco Rakesh at Yale University calculated that in the early infant brain, there are 100,000 synapses. Synapses are the connections between brain cells. There are 100,000 synapses that are solubilized every second. Why? Because there's no traffic across those synapses. If there was proper stimulation, a proper environment, gentleness, the parentese, the way parents talk to their child, it's not the way you and I talk to each other. It's, hi, sweetheart, how are you? It's slow, it's louder, it's full of emotion, it's connection. This engages the multi-sensory integration, the eyes, the ears, the skin, the smell, everything engages together. And that's what builds these brain connections. Otherwise, if that traffic is not there, those connections are solubilized, and the next 100,000 connections are ready to be solubilized because they have not. So this is where the architecture of the brain is set up. The child's brain has enormous potential, but it's those early experiences, the early nutrition. In fact, a number of studies have now confirmed this. 250 million children, or 43% of the children under 5 years of age, are unlikely to reach their developmental potential for various reasons. For, like Janhvi pointed out, poverty, maternal education, urban versus rural areas. The problem is extremely, I would say, resistant in rural areas because there is nothing available. There's no food, there's no responsive caregiving. The mother has to be on the fields, before the child wakes up. And frequently, those children die from enteropathic diseases and things like that. So I think for education to happen, health and nutrition and responsive caregiving from an adult caregiver are the key important ingredients. And then we can enable this child to reach their developmental potential.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. Now, thinking the problems, the opportunities that we've just framed, you've framed so beautifully. There are a number of exciting, exceptional developments happening in the space, rocket learning and others, and you are all at the forefront of this work across research and policy and civil society spheres. As you look across this global landscape, what ideas or innovations or new types of partnerships are you most excited about or hopeful about that can serve as an example to replicate and or scale? And Temina, if you don't mind, can I put you on the spot? What are you seeing through your perspective that's really invigorating?
Sure. I think there's a lot of exciting research that's uncovering what could be cost effective, what would have impact. One study that I think represents a larger body of work is a study of teacher practices and child-teacher interactions. I think it's important for us to get more teachers trained, but and serving as early child caregivers. But the quality of their training and the quality of their interactions makes a big difference. So a recent study in Colombia in government preschools looked at the comparison between providing preschools with more materials and play objects and improvements in their infrastructure versus improving teaching practices by giving preschool teachers lots of coaching, by observing them and giving them feedback, by helping them become those responsive caregivers that Sunny is talking about. And what you find, perhaps not surprisingly, is that play objects really don't make much of a difference in this context. In fact, it actually distracted caregivers away from providing responsive care because children now had toys and were sort of taken care of in the minds of some of the caregivers. When you do train and cultivate and support the caregivers, children's cognition, their language, their school readiness increases, in this case by 0.15 standard deviations. And what was most compelling is that it improved by 0.3 standard deviations for the most disadvantaged children. In other words, it lessened that inequality gap by basically empowering and supporting the nurturing caregiver. And so I think really focusing on the caregivers and giving them the support they need to be there for the children and our next generation is essential. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is the importance of maternal mental health. And this often gets left out of the equation, but those early months of a child's life, which are so brimming with potential and this massive growth in sensory processing, in social and emotional learning, this can be stymied when mothers are depressed. And so we've seen a number of studies providing not psychiatric care, because that's unrealistic in most countries to provide every mother with psychiatric care, but to provide peer-led counseling and support for young mothers who are suffering from depression. I think that has a lot of promise. And I think too often women are isolated in those early months and overburdened and not given the social support and emotional support that's needed to be a responsive caregiver. I don't mean to put everything on the mother. I think caregiving needs to be a multi-person task in any household. But I do think that thinking more about mental health in the context of early child development, the mental health of the primary caregiver, who often is the mother in those early months, is really critical if we want to improve outcomes.
Oh, thank you for addressing that and bringing that up into the conversation. It'd be great. And if there's examples of specific ways you're seeing this deployed in real action or ideas, it would be wonderful to learn more about that, or please chime in. Janhvi, I know that you are really involved in working with some models that are potentially quite game-changing or very encouraging, from Mongolia to Ethiopia. And I was wondering if you could share some of those case studies at the country level, especially back to the India context as well, how they might be replicable or inform things across rural and urban environments.
Sure. And maybe before saying that, I should tell Temina, as a young working mother, I couldn't agree more. I just feel like it takes a village or a community to raise a child. It's really tough. And I think putting the kind of pressure we put on ourselves is just, it's very, very difficult, and especially in low resource contexts. So couldn't agree more with that. But maybe I think my first more optimistic note here is just that it's doable. Everything we're talking about is doable. I want to just share some amazing success stories. So from 2005 to 2010, typically for a few countries, Serbia, the early childhood education enrollment went from 40% to 93%. Nepal went from 12% to 86% in a span of 20 years. Bangladesh went from under 10% to over 40%. And probably the most startling is Ethiopia, which went from 1.6% to 46%. And I think the key to this is that they tried very hard to not repeat the mistakes that we made when we were trying to think about K-12 education and primary education. So some of those mistakes we made was that we focused on access first, and then the conversation shifted to quality. So it was access. We got to gross enrollment rates of almost 100%. And then people just realized, hey, but kids aren't learning anything. So we then focused on quality. The second thing was a focus on equity from the very beginning. So models were designed keeping in mind the more marginalized, and they were made to be more accessible and suitable for all. So instead of just focusing on the same standard model, and I cannot stress this more, in early childhood education, it's a leading beacon in the sphere of education, because we're really thinking about multiple models, especially those that drive down on quality and equity and focus on the barriers that the most marginalized face. And how they did this, I think there's a lot of learning that we can take from there, even for the Indian context, as you were saying. So in a place like Mongolia, where it's mainly nomadic, and here I want to draw comparisons to India, where we have a lot of migratory labor and also a lot of like seasonal work because of agriculture and, you know, being primarily an agrarian society still. They have something that they call GERS or GERS. They are basically portable tent schools. They're like satellite locations. And what they do is they employ the KG teachers who go alongside these learners. So to Tamima's point of like, actually educating and training teachers, they use existing teachers to kind of support that particular age group as they move. So this is actually set up in different locations as this population usually charts a very known path. So it's along different points of that path. In Ethiopia, they do something called the Accelerated School Readiness Program. Also a very interesting model. Of course, Ethiopia is a very poor country. They're not able to invest a huge deal in education, and especially not in pre-primary. So what they do is, for every 7-year-old who is eligible for grade 1, who's never been to any kind of pre-primary education before, they do a summer program. And that is just 150 hours concentrated over the summer. It averages to about 4 hours a day. And what they do is they pay the teachers who teach grade 1 and are usually, as I mentioned, doing the catch-up program, a stipend, and get them to do it. So it's an additional income for the teacher. They teach 3-4 hours a day, and they see huge increases in outcomes. And more than that, they've seen a huge decrease in dropouts in primary school. Again, a huge model for us to learn, because in India, the summers are long, teachers do have breaks. It is absolutely doable to think about a summer program, which is very, very focused. In a different kind of situation in Nigeria, they're focusing on 1 year of pre-primary, just 1 year. So while we would all like to think of a 3-4 year program, which would be the best, even just 1 year of a pre-primary program has proved to have huge benefits. So I think what they're trying to do is, instead of saying 3-4 years and only a few children can access it, they're saying 1 year, but everyone accesses it. And that's been the huge shift I was mentioning in the beginning towards equity, which is really, really wonderful. So these are just some of the very, very promising examples from around the world, which just lead us to believe that this is doable.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Dr. Sunny, if we can come back to you, thinking about examples of integrations and thinking about ECD and the confluence of promoting good health and nutrition that you touched on in early childhood. Are there examples you've seen of these successful integrations that promote that the good health and nutrition, throughout your global research studies and so forth, or how should we be thinking about it, this integration point?
Sure. I think the key issue that you had touched on is nutrition. Every pediatrician knows this, but for those who are not practicing pediatrics, maybe many of you are mothers, but you may not know that it's when the child is sleeping, that's when the pituitary gland just below their brain releases the largest amounts of growth hormone. So growth hormone is primarily released while the child is sleeping at night. And so what happens is that those hormonal releases will cause a lot of growth happening while the child sleeps. Organ maturation, bones are growing, blood is forming, muscles are being built, et cetera, et cetera. And so when the child wakes up, their entire metabolic system is exhausted of all the resources that were available. There's no glycogen in the liver or the muscle. There's no amino acids that are available, et cetera. So that first morning nutrition is so critically important. Yet, most of the children in India, particularly in rural areas, go to school hungry. They, their parents are laborers. They've already left and the child goes to the school, and they are waiting for the midday meal in most government schools in order to get their first nutrition. In the meantime, the brain is using up fuel by breaking down the tissues that were built during the night. So it's amazing that when you look at child growth failure, like stunting, there are 5 to 10-fold differences between districts in India that have a low socio-demographic index versus a high socio-demographic index. I can tell you, in order to prevent things like stunting and wasting and underweight, we will have to focus on nutrition. Nutrition that doesn't supply only the macros, but also the micronutrients that a child needs. The other aspect is their immune function is very much dependent on this nutrition in order to prevent the early childhood diseases. So one of the experiments that we started out just in a few villages outside of Bangalore is by giving breakfast to children that was culturally sensitive, that was cooked fresh right there in the school. And now, we as a volunteer organization are feeding 1.2 million children every morning. In 23 of the 31 states in India and 3 union territories. And this has increased the enrollment rates in school and preschool. It has decreased the dropout rates. It's improved their cognitive performance, their growth rates. So what we had found previously that the stunting prevalence of greater than 40% amongst the early childhood is a very high prevalence of stunting. This was present in 67% of districts in the low SDI or socio-demographic index states versus only 1% of the districts in the high SDI states in India. And so simple interventions like this. Now, what we did was through another nonprofit, we started teaching Anganwadi teachers how to recognize the 31 common childhood diseases, deficiencies, disabilities, and all. It's simply a checklist of 31 things. And there's no time. They can just check out each child once in a year, but very easily, very quickly, those children will get the attention that they need. And they will, whether it's, eyesight, whether it's, vitamin B deficiency or whatever it is, those things can be addressed quickly through a referral pattern. So I think all of us need to come together in this task, because this is where the new consumers are. There are more children being born in villages in India than in urban areas. This is where the workforce is going to come from. This is where the teachers, the doctors, and administrators will be born. So we all need to come together to eliminate this developmental gap that is occurring, for almost half of the children growing up in low resource settings.
Oh, thank you. That feels like a perfect thing to stick with us for a long time and to motivate us all into our purpose-driven efforts and the importance of this work. When, I'm wondering if we can take a moment to just switch and think about really tech-enabled solutions and the role that they can play in this, or the challenges that they can play in this. If you don't mind us shifting gears in that way, and I know, Temina, you have a lot of cutting edge work in technology and have your pulse on that. And, the science around, early development is moving so quickly, and the digital divide is continuing to shrink as, affordable technologies become available to families and daycare workers and so forth. But what are you seeing in terms of opportunities or challenges, particularly to some of the frontline communities, or any adoption that is encouraging or potential and risks?
Sure. Thanks, Margo. We, as Dr. Sunny just said, frontline workers are very busy. Anganwadi workers, Ashas, all of these millions of people who care for our families every day take on a huge task, often not well compensated. And so one of the places that we think technology, if well designed, could play a big role is in enabling Anganwadi workers to keep their work focused, to spend more time with children in that responsive caregiving mode. Technology should be there to automate things which are redundant, to eliminate frictions in our day-to-day work. Right now, I feel like some of the technologies that are built for Anganwadis and Ashas, the apps that they use to collect data about children, about families and pregnancies, those are pretty difficult to use. They are not like Facebook and Google and WhatsApp. We don't make the investments that we should in making them user-friendly. And yet we entrust these people at the front lines with keeping our children healthy and with stimulating them. We can't encumber them with technology. We need to empower them with technology. So I have seen some recent research looking at things like the Poshan tracker, how Anganwadis interact with the app, and making a series of recommendations for improving that kind of technology. I think we still have a long way to go in getting what you might call civic tech or government tech to meet the needs of frontline workers. And this is not just in India, this is everywhere. This is in the United States where I sit. Caseworkers and social workers are not provided the quality of technology that they need to do the life-saving work that they do. So I think there's room for investment. I am seeing some venture capital firms making investments in these kinds of technologies. Google Ventures has invested in companies that are building case management software for social workers, and I think that's wonderful. But we really need to rethink the design of technologies for frontline workers. I think the other space where we're very excited, and obviously Rocket Learning has brought us all here together, supporting parents in their journey as caregivers. I was a first-time parent not too long ago at the age of 40, so older than most, but was pretty clueless. I think we all are in how to navigate the uncertainty of raising a child and their constant needs, their inchoate demands. We often don't understand what they need. And so I've been really excited to see the growth in chatbots and digital communities and other services that can provide vetted, trustworthy advice to parents at the right time, in the right context for them. I think that's essential. There is so much misinformation, whether it's from previous generations, well-meaning traditions that actually are probably not good for us, or missing out on, what I wanted to say is actually that a lot of migrant parents who leave their homesteads and their parents behind, they have no elders to guide them. And so this kind of technology becomes even more important. I think over time, we'll see chatbots as a new kind of interface for accessing information. There's a lot of excitement, I think, in the tech community around language models and chat interfaces that will help people access information in a more natural way. I'm excited that Rocket Learning and others in this space are really at the frontier of science and technology. My understanding from talking with a colleague who works at Google Health is that the engineers at Rocket Learning have implemented state-of-the-art machine learning algorithms to be able to improve the service they provide to parents. And just the idea of the greatest technologies coming out of one of the most wealthy companies on earth, reaching very low-income parents in a slum somewhere outside of Mumbai. That is exciting to me, that this technology, as you said, the digital divides are shrinking, and we're able to bring really cutting-edge technology to people, to parents when they need it. Sorry, I sound like a tech evangelist. I don't mean to, because technology doesn't solve everything.
No, but what I loved so much is that the conversation is not about sticking a young person in front of a screen. It's about thinking about technology as a platform to enable connection, to create hopefully stronger in-person and local connections as well. And so thank you for this, and all the right, tech is just a tool. It's only as valuable as the content and connection that it brings. Yes, please, Dr. Sunny, please, please.
So I just wanted to sort of follow from that comment that Temina had made. My colleague Patricia Kuhl from University of Washington in Seattle did this very unique study where she took infants between the age of 6 to 10 months of age. This is when language happens. This is when babies will start to do baba and dada and so on. Mama, of course, being the very first. So what she did was she took these babies and exposed them to Mandarin. Sounds that were completely, foreign to this baby's social ecology. And she had two groups. One group got an actual person, conversing with them in Mandarin 1 hour a day, for about 12 weeks. And the other group got the same content, the same person, deliver that content through a screen. And when she measured face recognition or word recognition in these children, what she found that the in-person interaction, their learning just took off. Whereas the same content and person coming through a screen did not, they did not have, they could not show a significant change in word recognition at 12 months of age, or after this 12-week program. So it's important that in person, because that in person causes multisensory integration to happen. And in order for any experience, any learning to be embedded and become part of that child's, development, it has to activate at least 3 sensory systems. So the ones that are most active in the early childhood space are the auditory, of course, the visual, of course, kinesthetic, and the tactile. So those are the 4 sensory systems that really become, the most effective in delivering the experience into learning.
Thank you. Wow, this is fascinating. This is my first time having a pediatric expert in this space join this. It puts amazing context for this conversation. Janhvi, over to you, and then I'm conscious of our time. We'll start to wrap up and pass it to Namya before too long. But please.
I actually just want to build on 2 things that were already said. The first is, the study that was just mentioned around the Mandarin exposure. A very similar study was done on books. So, books read online or read on a platform versus someone engaging with a child on a book. But I do want to say that one of the big things that we're trying to work on is to demystify this early childhood education or any education. Because what ends up happening is also when we overcomplicate it, then it becomes this domain of experts, as though people can't do it. But like as Dr. Sunny was saying earlier, or as Temina was also talking about, it is just that parent-child interaction. It is what comes naturally to us, and it is not rocket science. So even if you had a book with pictures and you just see parents pointing to those pictures and talking to those children, the growth and the learning in the child is substantially more than a platform which reads every word perfectly with exact enunciation. Because the child is engaging in a 2-way dialogue vis-a-vis a 1-way dialogue, and that is game-changing. So just providing parents with the right tools, as Temina was saying, just giving people the right content in their hands is game-changing. A program like Sesame Street, which has had so many outcomes and which has been measured in so many ways, which is incredible. If that same program is viewed together with a parent, the outcomes substantially grow again. So what I want to call out is, I think one mistake that we've made a lot is to make education very inaccessible for low-income homes, and to just change that myth, and to just challenge that myth, to really just call out the fact that every person in them, their parent is their first educator, and that is very common. And it's absolutely okay if you are not educated to still be your child's first educator, because you can count, the chapatis that you're eating, and you can also sort of call out animals or birds in the sky. And that in itself is helping this child learn and grow just because of your responsiveness and your connection to the child. So I think that's the first thing I want to call out. And the second was, on the example that we were talking about in terms of food and nutrition for children, there's this wonderful campaign that was done in Sri Lanka called 1 Cup of Milk, which just gave children 1 cup of milk first thing in the morning. And then again, they measured outcomes and they substantially grew. But one of the interesting things was the way this campaign came to be. And there's another similar one that was done in the Philippines. It was a very interesting example. Some pediatricians in the Philippines took a look at the children who did not have any kind of growth issues at all. And they said, how come they don't have it and others have it in the exact same community, exact same income? And what they found was the mothers who were giving them very often smashed rice would overwash the rice. And therefore, in these very, very clean rural areas where there were a lot of nutrients in the soil, and therefore that was transferring, that was not going to the children when it was overwashed. So all they did was do this study and then share the data to say, actually, please don't overwash the rice. It's not going to solve everything. It's not going to give you every micronutrient that's needed, but it's definitely helping much more than very, very clean rice, smashed rice, which is not giving your child any of the nutrients. So sometimes it's just building on local indigenous practices. And I think Temina was mentioning this when she was talking about what technology and data can do. That's the power of evidence. To just actually maybe look at local practices and look at simple hacks, if you would like, that some mothers or some families have figured out, and build on that without necessarily bringing something from outside, which may be frankly unaffordable and very, very difficult to implement. So I think leaving parting thought on this is, to demystify it, make it really, really accessible, and just to make it very, very localized and affordable. If we try and make it like the K-12 system, where schools are the only place people learn and teachers are the only source of all learning, we will destroy the early childhood space as well by making it very inaccessible and really, really not bridging the equity divide.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm going to, I'd love to bring Namya back in to wrap us up. Thank you for that, that invigorating call to action, if you will, at the end, summing this rich conversation up and thinking about tying it back to the India context and the global South, and how to tie and share best practices and really empower the Awangari and the parent communities together to recognize all the gifts and expertise they already have in them to share and nurture our next generations ahead. Thank you all for being with us for this fantastic and rich conversation. And Namya, over to you to take us out on this amazing day.
Thank you, Temina, Dr. Anand, Janhvi. Thank you for your insights, for your wisdom, for your stirring call to action for all of us, right? To go out and really sort of start making a difference for the youngest children, those with the greatest potential to change, our world in the future. I think that this has been an incredible day for all of us. I think this has left us touched, concerned. Dr. Anand, before when we were speaking, said that this inequality is almost obscene, right? The fact that more of us are not thinking and acting more to sort of solve this fundamental inequality is almost obscene. So I hope that this has brought sort of all of us together who are in this ecosystem to learn from each other, to build new practices and hopefully new collaboration and partnerships as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening or a day ahead. Thank you all for joining us at different time zones. And yes, have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful to be with you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.